Hello, it's Tom and Magnolia here, and this is Gunnerkrigg Court, Chapter 70, Dealing with Her.
Hello.
So this chapter is kind of like the previous chapters where the kids go out at night and they go hang out, like the bowling chapter and the faraway morning one, but with a bit of a difference. You know, they're faced with this new situation with the two new Annies here, and they've conspired together to kind of face the situation head on.
Is this night the first night Annie slept in that bed, or is this like a couple days after she came back?
It's probably a couple days after, yeah. But we see the usual gang is here, and they're pretty upfront about what they're up to. And I use this as an opportunity to show that there are a few things different in the court. You know, like they have to watch out for the patrolling robots, whereas before there was not really a big concern, and Kat's mentioned before that you need to keep away from them, so it's just a little obstacle that they needed to get by.
I really like the scene with Path. It's nice to see a different side of her.
Yeah, throughout the next few chapters, and I guess what would comprise this whole book, we do start to see a bit of a different side to Path. You know, she is kind of very defensive about Kat, because as we learn throughout the rest of the chapters, Kat is kind of dealing with a few things and like keeping it to herself, and we will get into that into this chapter, but this really is kind of the first indication of that, where Path is outright letting Annie know that, you know, she's going to be watching her to make sure she doesn't keep making Kat upset. And at this point, I guess the reader and Annie as well would be kind of absorbed with Annie's situation, you know, not really understanding that perhaps there is something going on with Kat, and maybe there is something else behind the scenes that we've not seen yet. And as the book does continue, we'll see a bit more of that.
I like seeing this from Path. I don't find it unlikable personally, just because, you know, if it's your girlfriend or whatever, you would get defensive about it, and you would put that above anything else. And I don't know, like, she's not being super nice to Annie right now, but why does she have to be, I guess?
Yeah, she's being cautious, I suppose. She like, the whole point of this chapter is them trying to figure out if this Annie is even real, you know, so she's kind of being suspicious and letting her know that she's not going to get away with anything, I suppose.
Which is a reasonable reaction, I think.
Yeah, I guess so.
This early, anyway.
Yeah, but it's just kind of funny as well that Path, you know, is such a sweet girl, and you wouldn't think that she would have this side of her.
Is Kat's shirt a reference to anything?
It is. It's the symbol from Ico.
Oh, right. Of course.
And we see also that Parley and Smitty have joined the little party here.
Everyone looks really cute in this chapter. I like Annie's hair. I like Parley's outfit. It's just good looks.
Yeah, as usual, I like to design a little ensemble for all of the characters each chapter, but from this point forward as well, I wanted to distinguish the clothes that the Annie that came from the forest and the Annie that lives in the court would wear. So Forest Annie would wear kind of greens and browns, whereas the Annie that's lived in the court kind of wears purples and blues. And at this point is where I kind of start distinguishing them, aside from them having long or short hair.
Is there a name we should call them from now on, so we don't have to keep saying the Annie from the forest, the Annie from the court?
I guess we can just call them Forest Annie and Court Annie.
Yeah, that works.
And we see that the kids have a plan in mind that neither of the Annies are aware of. And they use Parley's teleportation ability to send them to this kind of underground bunker here. And really, it's just a contrivance for me to get to the meat of the plot, you know, which is the two Annies having to sit and really talk face to face, you know, and kind of deal with what's going on.
Have they been mostly avoiding each other until now?
Yeah, they pretty much have. And in the previous video, I mentioned that I wanted to talk about why I kind of had the two of them get together like this. And this is really the scene that deals with all that. And I guess what we'll be talking about for the rest of this video.
So what is it about there being two Annies that was so interesting to you?
Well, the thing that attracted me most to this idea was the idea of having essentially one character monologuing with themselves and working out issues with themselves internally, but taking that and making it external and making it very literal and for the camera. So there's a lot of situations here where Annie might have just been thinking to herself and conveyed, I guess in comic form it could have been done through speech bubbles, but I really like the idea of confronting yourself as another self-actualized person, I suppose. And even though the difference between these two Annies is just the 6 months spent in the court or in the forest, I wanted it to be clear that even that amount of time has kind of differed them enough from each other that they do show some differences, but underneath are still very similar. And one thing about Annie is that I suppose you could say she's kind of hard on herself, and that's manifested here directly by Court Annie being very rude, I suppose, to the notions that Forest Annie is trying to convey. And so one of the problems that Annie has is that she's very self-absorbed but not very self-aware, if that makes sense. So
I think those two things go together a lot, actually.
So now she's kind of able to see how she comes across from an external perspective. Forest Annie is seeing a very stubborn and angry side of herself from outside. And I suppose Court Annie is also seeing, I guess, what she would consider to be a more naive and thoughtless version of herself that she might have felt she was 6 months ago. Because we'll see in a few pages that Court Annie has also gone through a few developments herself, which lead to her being in the situation that she is in right now and kind of how she acts like she is now.
But it's also true that they're harder on each other than they would be on another person, right?
Sure, yeah. And I think that comes down to a little bit of we hate in others what we see in ourselves, and this is kind of the prime example of that, where you're seeing how you act externally and it kind of rubs you the wrong way, especially with Court Annie here, and a little bit with Forest Annie, we'll see in a sec. But also the subplot to what's going on in this chapter is that Lou has managed to send a seed into the court and send them a message just to let them know that the clock is still kind of ticking. He's still waiting for them to accomplish the task that he has asked them. And Court Annie also gets to see a little bit of what Loop is like.
And even the thing with the Annies being a little disgusted at Lou calling them my love, that's something that Annie might not have expressed verbally otherwise. So it's nice to get to see that, I guess.
Yeah, there's lots of little interactions between the two of them that would have just been completely obscured as part of their normal thought process, and that was the fun of it for me, to just convey little scenes like that. And so through Loop's meddling here, he mentioned that a creature seems to have been led to their location. And this kind of sets up the situation where the two of them also have to start working together.
What is this creature exactly?
So this creature turns out to be an ashray, we'll see later. And an ashray is kind of a vague, I guess, Scottish myth that is pretty much just like a malevolent water sprite or sea ghost. Or it seems to be a creature of no particular shape or definition that is made out of translucent water. And so because it had no single form, I based the form of it on a type of jawless fish called a Dripanaspis, which I kind of like the sort of plated look of it. And, I gave it some pincers and I guess scorpion stingers on each of its appendages. And it was just a kind of weird looking creature that you didn't really have to feel too sorry about, I suppose. It was just kind of supposed to be a intimidating looking creature that is going to be pursuing them for the rest of this chapter. And it's through the pursuit of this creature that the two of them have to work together to get out. Of course, in the meantime, still talking out their problems, for the entertainment of the reading public.
This part where the Court Annie is worried about her dress. So is the idea that Court Annie might have become a little more interested in clothes and things in the 6 months since she left?
That's part of it, yeah, but also the fact that 6 months here in the Court Annie would have been a little bit more pampered, I suppose, and so the Forest Annie would kind of be looking back and thinking she'd never think like that, but it seems that the 6 months in the Court, I don't know, has kind of softened her a little bit, softened Annie. And this panel here is just a little indication that the Forest Annie's, I guess, a little bit bewildered about why she would ever act like that,
Well, it's nice that she's softer but also tougher in some ways.
Yeah, the two of them are, and in some ways the Forest Annie is tougher also, but not quite as tough as the Court Annie, And we'll see that here, actually, specifically where they try to get through these wet routes here to get to an escape route, but Forest Annie is not able to do it. But then we see that Court Annie whips out this laser beam that she did in a few chapters ago, which is something that Forest Annie isn't able to do. And that gives the indication that in the last 6 months she's gone through some development as well. She's picked up this move because Kat pointed it out from, a move that Frieza does from Dragon Ball. And this lets them go into talking about Kat directly, and we start to see that finally now Annie is able to pick up on the fact that maybe there's some stuff going on with Kat. I mean, it's a shame that it had to be brought to her attention by Path calling her out to her face, but either way, that's how it happens. And this little scene here is, I kind of imagine as a thought that everybody has to themselves. If somebody's threatening you, no matter how much you like them or if whatever, it's pretty natural, I think, to think to yourself, I could probably take them, but and that would sound unreasonable if you were to say it out loud, out of context. And that's sort of what's coming across here. It's just a little thought that Annie is having to herself, but being brought out literally to the viewers,
Could Annie take her, though? I always got the impression that she's a bit physically weak, Yeah,
but she could just cut her in half with her laser beam.
Oh, yeah.
If she really wanted to.
That's true.
I mean, Annie has toughened up a little bit since her forays into the court and stuff. And so I'd say she probably is a bit stronger than Path. She's taller anyway, but yeah. I'm sure Path could put up a good fight if it was mano a mano.
What about Kat, though?
I think Kat would be taken out pretty easily. She's kind of a wet blanket, unfortunately for Kat. But anyway, aside from that, we see here, again, what I would imagine would be an internal monologue that somebody would be having, like figuring out a situation and trying to come to a conclusion about it, but just being played out between the two separate sides of her personality, talking face to face. And unfortunately for Annie, we see that she's still stubborn-headed at the end, and she hopes that maybe what's happening is just that Path is being unreasonable,
Well, it just goes to show that even this isn't enough to solve all your problems. You also have to look outside yourself, and sometimes being able to talk things out with yourself means that you're able to convince yourself of things that everyone else would call out as not true. And so she's able to just retreat into, or maybe it's just we're fine and there's no problems at all.
Yeah, and we kind of get an indication that Annie deals with some of her problems by not thinking about them, and hoping that they'll just go away.
Yeah.
But that's not
Annie.
always the case. Yeah, she's still got some learning to do. So in this page, again, we get another indication that Court Annie is also going through some development, living in the post-forest attack court. It turns out that Court Annie has seen an Ashray before, and probably some of the other creatures that have been attacking the court since then. So she knows kind of how to deal with it, and she knows where it is, even though Forest Annie may have heard of an Ashray, she's never actually seen one. And it turns out that this is one of those creatures that Esengrin warned them about. It's a water creature that isn't necessarily as vulnerable to fire as something else might be. And this lets them reminisce a little bit about Esengrin and feel bad that he's basically been completely absorbed by Lou now. And the two of them kind of feeling bad for their lot in life, even though they both feel that the other one has something that they've lost. And this leads to the kind of surprise revelation that even though we've seen that Tony is acting differently to Forest Annie, it turns out he's been acting completely the same to Court Annie.
I also think it's nice that it's also a relief to see Forest Annie express that she feels like she's lost 6 months and that she's lost her home, she feels like, because, again, that's something that she may not have expressed verbally otherwise.
Yeah, she may have just put up with anything kind of wordlessly, and accepted what people are telling her. But yeah, here she's outright saying that, no, look, I feel like everything is different now and I've lost everything. And that, again, is being conveyed outright for us to read. But unfortunately, the revelation that Tony is acting differently to Forest Annie rubs Court Annie the wrong way, and this kind of makes them get angry at each other again. And I guess in her jealousy, Court Annie says something a little bit unreasonable. And it's shown that, again, during the 6 months, Court Annie has gone through the development of demanding that she gets to wear her makeup again, which is something that Tony kind of took away from her all those chapters ago. And this shows that Court Annie was probably frustrated at her younger self, her 6 month younger self, where when she remembers that she was reticent to mention to her father that she wants to wear her makeup again, and that kind of leads to a little tiff that they have here.
This part is so heartbreaking with the necklace. It's just really such a sad situation.
Yeah, if Forest Annie had been wearing it at the time that she went into the forest, then they would both have one now, in the same way they both have the hair clips. But because she didn't want to lose it, as she explains here, she left it at home, and now she did lose it. Like the Annie that got to stay in the court is the one that gets to keep it. And this pushes Forest Annie a little bit too far.
But it's also sad to see that she's still fighting not to cry, even though she has every reason to break down at this point.
Yeah, and you could say that she doesn't want to be seen to be breaking down in front of herself. She doesn't want to seem weak in front of herself, really. So she just pushes it back, and this at least causes Court Annie to realize, yeah, she probably is being a bit of a witch. And gets her to ease up, and they do actually sit and hash it out,
This is one of my favorite pages.
And this is probably the page where I guess they become friends. They at least ease up on each other, and they realize that they're both stuck in the same boat.
It's still very sad, though, that they can't even say it out loud to themselves and to each other.
Yeah, well, in everybody, I think there is some part of themselves that they can't even admit to themselves, and they're coming up against that wall here, So
Poor Annie.
And they come to the conclusion that sharing the necklace is the solution, and they're able to get on with the task at hand, which is escaping this underground bunker and dealing with the Ashray.
This combining their powers thing is just a really fun, classic way to deal with this, I think.
Yeah, they've learned to work together, I suppose. So they realize that 2 fire elementals are more powerful than 1, and so they're able to combine their power and literally boil up the room like a kettle. And if you punch a hole in a pressurized container, then all the steam will leave through the path of least resistance. So the Ashray basically gets atomized into the atmosphere.
Is it dead, or can it come back?
Nah, it's dead.
Aw.
But that's kind of why I just made the design look monstrous and completely inhuman, so there's like not a lot of sympathy for it, because it attacked and they had to get out, so this is what they had to do. And they're able to get back to the kids who are waiting for them. And it seems like they somehow planned the whole thing, even though both of the Annies are bewildered at how they arranged to get an ash ray attack and a message from Loop. And it turns out that the plan that they did have in mind didn't actually get put into action. We see that what they were going to do was get this familiar looking creature here to kind of harass them and hound them through the tunnels, but the ash ray took over instead. So
Svet is my favorite character, and ever since Parley started training to be the Dragon Slayer, I realized that eventually she might get an Orjack, and I was just waiting for that day, so I was so happy when Svet finally showed up.
Yeah, this was planned, again, all along, since in this world, the Dragon Slayer always has kind of a partner, Orjack, to accompany them, and Parley had just been away on a mission, I guess obtaining her partner in this case. And Svet is obviously a lot smaller than what we saw of Sivo all the way back in Chapter 3, but it's because Svet is still young, and as we'll get to see in later chapters, I wanted to write her kind of as a teen girl, she's still young and eager to get to work, and she's in a new country now, and she's excited by everything, which I thought was kind of a fun way to write her.
Well, she's the best.
But we do see that she was basically eavesdropping the whole time, that the Annies were talking to each other. And then as we start to wrap things up, we see, since the goal of the evening was to help Kat cheer up a little bit, I suppose. That is at least temporarily achieved here, and the Annies get a thumbs up from the girlfriend.
Here's a question that might be going behind the curtain too much. Do you think it's that Kat thought that maybe it would help if the Annies got along, it would help her feel better about the situation, but then felt like that she still didn't feel any better about what was going on?
It's partly that, she did want the two Annies to get along, but there are certain events a little bit later that show that Kat is still dwelling on things. So it's a little bit of both. But the last page here is just basically setting up the task for the next few chapters in that Lou has, given them the task of bringing back the gifts, but it turns out that the two gifts have been lost in the attack. And that's how that chapter ends. And this little bonus page, again, just shows a bit of Svet's personality, in that she's kind of eager and, she wouldn't mind a bit of a tussle, even if it was just like friendly terms kind of thing. But
Renaud's gotten too old for that stuff.
Yeah, he's not interested in that. And that's the end of that chapter. So come back again for chapter 71, New Contract.
Bye!